It's so good to be here. My name is Alexandra Musser, and you have welcomed me here before. I'm delighted to be back. I am a Centers for Spiritual Living practitioner. Sharon and I went to school together, and I am a senior ministerial student. I finished this spring Master's in Consciousness Studies through the Holmes Institute. And so it is an honor for me to be able to be out doing the work that I've been called to do before the doors are even fully open. So you bless me so much by having me here. Thank you. And hello, Zoomers. Today's talk is, in continuing the topic of the sacred and the profane, is to talk. Profane has to do with the sacred. And so before I get to the talk, I'm going to give you an example of the profane. And so there is this priest that typically on Fridays goes and plays golf with a group of other men and priests. And this particular Friday, he has nobody to go with. So he calls on some of the nuns and says, listen, could you just accompany me? I don't want to be on a golf course by myself. So the nuns think this is a little bit strange. There's 3 of them, and they go, fine, we'll go. So they go to the golf course, and he tees up, and he just sets the ball, and whoosh, and it goes off into the water. So he says, damn, I missed. And the nuns are, oh, no. If you're going to say these things, we can't be here. He says, I'm really sorry. I was just frustrated with myself. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. So he tees up again, and he takes his club, and he hits the ball, and whoosh! This time, it goes into the weeds. And he says, damn, I missed again. So they're like, Father, if you are going to cuss again, we're going to have to go back to the convent. We just cannot be around this kind of profanity. And he says, I am so sorry. In fact, if should I do this again, may the good Lord open up the skies and strike me down by lightning. So that's pretty convincing, and the nuns stay, and so he tees up again, and whoosh, and the ball hits a tree, and it ricochets, and he's about to say, damn, but the skies open up, and there's just thunder, and lightning bolts come down, and it strikes the nuns dead right then and there on a golf course. And the thundering, booming voice of God comes down from the heavens, and it says, damn, I missed. So I think this will take us into the realm of the profane. I looked up the meaning of the word profane in its origins. And it goes back, translated from Hebrew, it meant outside of the temple gates. So we had the sacred, which is whatever happened within the temple gates, and we had the profane. It meant really secular, okay? So toothbrushing could be considered profane, although now, as we were heard in the song, and as we know, there is no such thing, because all there is God. Is profane took on a meaning of not just only secular, but things that were bad, evil, sinful, dirty. At one point, it included prostitution. And so if somebody does something profane, we're not saying, hey, it's the equivalent of you're brushing your teeth because it's secular. It's a really, really bad thing to do. But if we believe that we live in a world where God is everywhere, Spirit is everything, is there really something that happens within the temple gates and outside? Is there an inside and an outside? Because that would be duality. There is no spot where God is not. And so in Science of Mind, and I went and looked up to see if the word profane is ever mentioned by Ernest Holmes, and it comes up once, and he refers to it as the word profane. And so again, he doesn't dwell on that, because I don't believe that they're even profane beings, because we're all created in the likeness and the image of God. We are created out of the same tapestry, the same stardust, the same perfect matrix of the divine. Now, can people that are godlings in expression do profane things? Yes, we have the free choice to do that. And so I would say that there can be profane acts. War, for example. And spirit of a little child, by letting them grow up to be ever so obedient and feeling like they're unworthy. And as a way of protecting them from the real world, I mean, that would be profane to me in terms of parenting. And I don't mean that in a negative, vile, evil, sinful way. I just mean that word in its original context, that it is ungodly. We can do ungodly things. We are aware of God qualities, and we also are aware of the opposite. And so what we have come to call evil, according to Emma Curtis Hopkins, is nothing but something, someone seeking its own good. And its own good is in contrast or contrary to somebody else's own good. And so that other person says, well, what you're doing is evil. And so we see this sadly in the conflict that we have in the Middle East right now. And it's heartbreaking. And we could say that any kind of war, regardless of the motivation for it, is a profane act, in that it is an ungodly act. But we've been doing some work with Mary Morrissey's book, Brave Thinking. And so Robbie Jean is in that sacred circle online. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that book or with Mary Morrissey. Mary Morrissey always wanted to be a school teacher. And when she was 16 years old in high school, she got pregnant. And that was, I think she's in her 70s now, so there was, the culture then. So she had to drop out of school. She had to marry the boy that was her boyfriend, the father of her children. And she was certain that she could never become a teacher. They were married for 25 years because there were kids that were put together by a circumstance. A circumstance that maybe some in those days, or even in those days, would call profane. But it isn't. It was a holy thing in that it brought about little holy beings that grew into beautiful adults and that are contributing to the world right now when she talks about them. And so what happened to her after 25 years of marriage, they separated amicably, and she subsequently had a church that had over 4,000 members. And it was a thriving church. She was married to another person by then. And a scandal ensued where a lot of money from that church was embezzled. There were a lot of people that lent money that disappeared. Her husband at the time pled guilty, went to prison for 3 years. She agreed to repay over $1 million to the people that were affected. And of course, the way in which she made money was through her speaking engagements and her ministry. She obviously did become the spiritual teacher, the teacher that she had wanted to be. And so she didn't have any kind of speaking opportunities after that. People didn't trust her. She was considered profane. She was considered being an unholy minister. When we are ministers, when we are in the spotlight, there's that much more expected of us. And of course, that would have been wrong for anyone to do. But there's certainly much more stigma attached to someone in ministry that people look up to when something bad like that, embezzlement, happens in the church. So she talks about the different ways in which she pulled herself up out of that. And since then, she has spoken at the United Nations, and she has met the Dalai Lama. And so And she talks about in her book about brave thinking, how recognizing that the things that happen in our lives happen for a reason, but as long as we are here, we need to change course. We need to elevate ourselves. To summarize, people say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't know that we need to be stronger. I know that we need to be more in alignment. Talks about that. And so therefore, things that are considered profane or things that we might have done, each and every single one of us, we've done things that are ungodly, must look at that with a sense of forgiveness and be able to say, how do I move beyond this? Because I am not the action. I am not the act. I am a being of God. I am created in the likeness of the eternal good. And so an act is a choice. And we do make poor choices sometimes, each and every single one of us. But we talk about how that can lead to the good. I want to share a little story. And I promised myself no notes because Spirit doesn't need no stinking notes, but I bring them for my quotes. And this is about St. Francis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with his history. And we're talking about the 11th century. And this is St. Francis of Assisi with the little animals and the vows of poverty. I have a St. Francis little plaque in my office. St. Francis was born of a woman that was a French aristocrat and a very wealthy Italian merchant. And his father was a merchant of fabrics. In that time, fabrics were imported, silks, velvets, embroideries, beautiful things. That was a very lucrative business to be in. So when he was born, his father was out of town, and his mother named him Giuseppe. And the father came back and changed his name to Francis in order to honor his mother's French ancestry. And so he grew up wealthy. He spoke French. He sang in French. He was an aristocratic, spoiled, what we would call today a bad boy as a teen, whatever that would be. And so he was known for his little escapades and those behaviors, and he was, protected by his status and his father's wealth. And then when he was in his 20s, he began to hear the voice of God. Now, today when people hear voices, we have medication for that. But back then, and the voice of God, then people paid attention to you. And if you heard different kinds of voices, there were exorcisms. But thankfully, we have evolved from that. But he became so passionate about the poor and what he can do. And he happened to be in a Dominican church praying at the altar. And he heard the church say, "Fix me, repair me. It was in great disappear. Restore me." And it just fell on his heart that was his to do, and he didn't know how to do it. So he went to his father's fabric warehouse, and he took the most expensive fabrics that he could find, and he sold them. And he came back to give that money to the Dominican monk there to restore the church. And the monk would not accept the money. Now, when his father returned, his father was very angry about this. Imagine Francis was in his early 20s, and he stole from his dad to listen to voices. We might take issue with that with our children. Who told you could do what? And so his father went to take him before the magistrate, and the magistrate had said, "It's a family matter. We don't get involved with that." So he took him before the bishop and yelled at him and humiliated him for his actions. And so Francis took off all his clothes down to his underwear, stood naked before the Catholic bishop and his father, and said, I give you all the fabric and the material that I have. And from now on, although you have been my father on earth until now, I only have one heavenly Father to serve. And he lived to be 40 years old. And so this is the quote that I brought here. He was living at a convent, and there was Brother Musser of Marignano. This is the reason for my notes. And Father Musser was well known, and he often spoke to God, and people trusted him. And he essentially said, why you, Francis? And Francis said, I don't understand. What do you mean, why me? And the father said to Francis, I mean, why is it that all the world goeth after thee? Why do all men wish to see thee, to hear thee, and to obey thy word? For thou art neither comely, nor learned, nor art thou of noble birth. How is it then that all the world goeth after thee? Because Francis had managed a following of the poor, of the lepers. He also started an order for nuns that would take the vow of poverty and work with the people. And he became a religious celebrity, if you will, although he remained in his meekness and in his poverty. And so essentially what he said is, know that it is because the Lord who is in heaven, who sees the evil and the good in all places, because I say, his holy eyes have found among men no one more wicked, more imperfect, or of a greater sinner than I am. And to accomplish the wonderful work which he intends to do, he has found no creature more vile than I am on earth, for which reason he has chosen me, to confound all strength, beauty, greatness, noble birth, and all the science of the world, that men may learn that every virtue and every good gift cometh from God. And so this is an example, if you could have paraphrased that, it would have been, he chose me because I was a total example of the profane, and recognizing that I was able to be elevated to this level of service so that I may share this with others, and that others can relate to me, and I cannot be in judgment. I can only be in gratitude. I think when Christianity speaks of believe in it in its traditional way, but I think each and every single one of us has moments of personal salvation, which is nothing more but being elevated back to the knowledge of who and whose we are. And so we all have days where we just fall into the muck and the mire of everyday life. We're here as spirit to have a human experience. And that human experience is not always the most marvelous thing in the world. It might be profane in terms of the things that we witness and sometimes are called to do out of ignorance. But we are profane beings, and there is a prevailing oneness throughout the universe. In each and every single one of us, we are a link in that divine chain. I want to share another story from Mary Morrissey's book that she talks about, and that's Diana Nyack. And for those of you that may or may not recognize the name, she is the woman that at the age of 64 swam 110 miles from Florida to Cuba. And I'm going to share a little bit about her story. And many would say that a swim, it's a secular thing. You're not doing it in church, you're doing it at sea. But we can see the purpose that is planted in each and every single one of us. Stay lit, and the older we get, the brighter it burns, because even though we are eternal beings in our physical state, we do have an expiration date as a body and flesh. That means we have different evolution. I've read someone saying, I would no more make an enemy of my death than I would of my birth. So this is not a negative thing. But we do feel that we came here to do something, and we best get to doing it. Like myself, my goal was to be a minister by the time I'm 70 years old. I'm retired from 35 years in real estate and mortgage lending, and it was burning in me. I had a really happy life in my career, but it was get up and do what you know, before you expire, before you stand in front of people and forget what you came here to say. And so the story of Diana is this. Her last name, she's Greek, comes from the Greek word that describes the nymphs at sea that were there to protect the gods. And so she was raised with the idea that she's a water baby and that she's a swimmer. And she was an excellent swimmer in the pool, and she swam around Manhattan Island, and she was a well-known swimmer. And her mother told her one day when she asked where Cuba was, because there were a lot of Cubans in Florida, that it's over the horizon, and maybe one day you'll be able to swim to it. So she began attempting to swim to Cuba when she was 28 years old. She was obviously very fit. She was at the peak of her physical abilities, and she failed 4 times. And 4 times, the news media, the New York Times, whoever it is that records, if you've ever watched these events, there are helicopters, there are cameras, there are boats that follow the swimmer. I mean, it's a team sport. It's a big ordeal. And so after failing 4 times, people kind of lost interest in having a big party about something that isn't going to happen. So she became a sportscaster. She would observe different sporting events, and she would report on them. And in her late 50s, she realized that she was watching people achieve their life dreams, and she went from being a doer to being a spectator. And again, feeling that sense of the expiration date, she decided that she would do this. And at the age of 64, she completed that swim. I shared a video, and you can look, there's been a movie made about this, and there's YouTube videos that you can watch when she reaches the beach in Florida. She looks every bit of 64. She looks great. Her face is distorted, her lips are swollen, she can barely speak because of the salt water. She did this, by the way, without using any shark cages, and there's sharks there, and there's jellyfish. And it took her 54 hours. 54 hours. And she falls into the water. There's people waiting for her. She crawls out, and she can barely speak. And she says, two things. And she can barely, it's just heartbreaking. And one is, you are never too old to live your dreams. Really audible, and it's never give up. And then she is put on the stretcher, and she's given IV fluids, and I know that her physical ability didn't improve from the time that she was 28, but her mental capacity is what grew. And she went from thinking, what did I do wrong? And I'll never do that again because I don't want to fail, because failure we just think is profane. You do not fail in God. So if I fail at doing something, I oftentimes think, well, maybe God doesn't want to express that through me, because God would not want to fail. So it's me. I am going in the wrong direction, and we all know failure isn't really a lot of fun, especially when you're followed with cameras and media and boats and everything else. And so we look at that the sacred and the holy, that the doors just open for thing goes well. And if it doesn't, it's not meant to be. So the reason I share this story is that we also have to look at our failures, like Francis did, and like Diana did, and say, is this mine to overcome? I don't know that we have to bang our head on every brick wall to overcome. That we make in prayer, contemplation, meditation. And sometimes we might decide incorrectly and we might come back to it later like she did and be able to have that breakthrough. But it is important to know that there is no separation. There is no failure. There is no inside or outside of the temple gates. Idea further to having more temples, more religions, more churches, then everybody is sacred and everybody else is profane because they're outside of our church. We are sacred in the center. We're not in the center. There are many that would say, well, you know, that's how we judge cults. That's how we judge other religions, false gods. There are no false gods. There is only one God. And so in wrapping up this, in my ministerial class yesterday, I was sharing about this talk, and the minister that was teaching us said, well, Alex, what happens in church? Do we just give people a boost to go out there and to feel good, and by the time it's time for dinner is like, exactly what did you say? And you know, and I said, marching orders, is that what you want? Homework? She says, well, people need to have a direction as to how this applies to them moving forward. So I want to invite you moving forward, when you find yourself in any kind of judgment, beginning with yourself and others around you, say there is no separation. Everyone and everything is holy. There is no spot where God is not. We are all part of that oneness, that tapestry of the divine. That person, that country, that whatever it is making a different choice. And I will pray like we practitioners pray, beyond the effects that we see, to the truth of who each and every single individual. We cannot change other people. We must be the change that we want to see in the world. Greg Braden in Heart Math had groups of people, and we see this in Circles of Eight too in that book, people gathering and praying things, different spots around the world, and how that actually makes a difference. Be that change. It's so easy to just make a judgment when somebody, or worse, the things we see on the news, people that are of other political parties, whatever, works both ways. Be the change. Label no one or anything as is God. Thank you. I believe that okay. And do you do a song before the prayer, or do you? Okay, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. So if we could recenter ourselves earlier by Sharon, that oneness of being the presence in the presence. I affirm that there is one power, love, one unity, one beauty, one creative expression on earth, in the universe, in the galaxies, in the places we cannot even fathom, that we call God. And that each and every single one of us is an expression of that. A divine point of love, infinity of the constellations of divine expression. And each and every single one of us is connected. We twinkle and we shine and we express our of every single one of us around us. We reflect the light of each other, and we emanate the light of the divine that is within each and every. From this place, I know that there is just a oneness of love, a oneness of humanity, a oneness of creative beneficence and that knows no profanity, that is just purely sacred. And I celebrate my sacredness, everyone's sacredness, the sacredness in everything. And I just deny contrary, knowing that it is not the truth of who and whose it is. It is wrongful thinking, and that can always, always be directed through the power of divine intelligence and the knowingness of the truth with a capital T, that all is divine. And so gratefully now, I just say thank you, and not in my head, but in my heart, and I share this heart place with everyone in this room, everyone on Zoom, and everyone on the planet, knowing that we all know this. And now I just release my word into that fertile soil of divine law from whence it does not return unfulfilled. The mind of God. And I ask you to please affirm with me. And so it is. Thank you.